As newspapers retooled for the internet era, many looked to online and digital news for salvation. Upstarts such as Vice and BuzzFeed promised a new horizon for journalism. Now, even those outlets are laying off thousands in offices all over the world. And the federal government is preparing a rescue package for Canadian media. What remains of the promise of an online news ecosphere? Let's ask Andrew MacLeod. He is the CEO of Postmedia. Colette Brin, Director of the Centre for Media Studies at the University of Laval and a visiting scholar at the Ryerson School of Journalism. Anita Lee, Director of Communities at the Discourse. And Jesse Brown, media critic and host and founder of the Canadaland podcast network. It is good to have everybody around our table tonight for a very timely discussion about the state of play. Here's, Jesse, you first. Here's the conventional wisdom for the last many years. Legacy media, especially newspapers, have been bleeding jobs like crazy. But digital outlets like Vice and BuzzFeed have been immune to those trends, except now they're not. They are both laying off too. What's going on here?
I think that if we conclude from the layoffs at BuzzFeed and Vice and HuffPo that, oh, look, these smart new digital players aren't so smart after all, and perhaps there's no future for making money off of news, you're reaching an erroneous conclusion. You can only get there if you buy the idea that BuzzFeed and Vice are news companies to start with. They're not. Vice is an advertising company that for many years had an incredible, successful run, convincing legacy media that they alone could reach a young demographic that were otherwise lost to Facebook and social media. BuzzFeed is a company that was involved in engineering viral hits and getting a ton of traffic on Facebook. That doesn't mean that they don't have serious journalists. They built great news departments. They hired real journalists. They broke big stories. But they were never in the news business. They were never in the business of trying to make money by reporting the news and seeing if that could turn a profit. Now that the advertising business is in free fall, we're seeing these huge layoffs. And so what we can conclude from that, it's not like you can't learn anything from that. I think what you can conclude from that is that if your news business is dependent on advertising, you're in big trouble. And I think we can conclude from that if we pursue the next generation of news in the same framework as a Silicon Valley tech startup, where venture capitalists get in, pump millions of dollars into small companies, hoping to get out in 5-6 years, if that, at 10 to 100 times valuations, get into it quick and get out, that's not going to work for news either. So there might be a future for money-making news. I run a tiny but profitable news company. It's nothing that a Silicon Valley venture capitalist would have any interest in.
Do you ever tell us what your revenues are or what your profit margin is?
Our revenues are about under $1 million, about half of what the CEO of Postmedia pulled last year.
It starts already, Andrew. Here we go.
Right. We have a growing team. In my career, 20 years in media, it's the only time I've been in a company that's getting bigger and not smaller. So we've got about, I think, 8 people on staff now and a network of freelancers and hosts, and we're making podcasts and reporting the news about the media on a micro level. I think that if we are going to talk as we are today about how news might make money in the future, we're talking about an industry that has downscaled from decade after decade of double-digit profit. You know, it's a multi-million, even billion-dollar business. Now we're talking about running news companies on the scale of running small restaurants or barber shops.
Let's follow up on that. Colette, he is part of the Canadian digital media landscape. How healthy or not is that landscape at the moment?
Well, it's healthier than others, but I don't see a very clear future for local news gathering as a business model. I don't think there's a profitable model for that as of yet.
In terms of digital?
In terms of digital, in terms even of general digital or not. I mean, we know that advertising has gone down and is still going down for traditional media sources, and everyone is, including public broadcasters, are looking to digital as the future, and the revenue isn't following.
You're not sure it's there?
Well, we're going to have to look at different questions, but I mean, in terms of revenue sources, but I think that we're still looking at decline in terms of newsrooms in the next couple of years.
Okay. Anita, you're with The Discourse. What is The Discourse?
The Discourse is a digital media company based in Vancouver that fills in gaps in news coverage in underserved communities. So I actually disagree with that point. I feel like as long as you have a very strong value proposition, you can fill in gaps in news coverage and serve a certain target demographic that is not getting the news they deserve. And so we do see a viable business model and a sustainable business model in serving local news outlets. And based on our internal research that was led by my colleague, Lindsay Sample, there's a lot of focus on the 260 news outlets that have closed their doors in the past decade. But what there's been little coverage about is the 93 digital media outlets that are largely audience pay focused, largely independent and digital, that have popped up during the same period.
They have popped up, but
Yes.
would you say that they have filled the gap that has been left behind by all of those 200 plus that have left?
I think they're filling the gap, and if we find funding that can develop sustainable business models for audience pay journalism outlets that prioritize public service journalism, and we take that seriously in this country, then absolutely.
What is your take on the health or not of the digital landscape in Canada right now?
Well, certainly, a lot of the points made around the table so far all point to revenue models. And, the core revenue model is, in fact, broken. Historically, it was based on advertising. And, with the new paradigm we're seeing, it's about scale. It's about platforms. It's about, I call them apex predators, the Silicon Valley giants that have a global platform. And they're draining the water out of the revenue bathtub, whether it's in Canada, the United States, Europe. It's the same sort of experience happening over and over again. We're seeing new models emerge. Some of them are digital advertising driven, some of them are subscription driven. And we're seeing evidence of things getting traction at a niche, smaller scale level. And so, there's a lot of things happening in our space, but I think it's still very fluid in terms of what the future will look like. But, we're confident that there is a path there for this space, and we're aggressively pursuing it.
We meaning Postmedia, National Post, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly, yes.
So this is way too simplified, but I'm going to do this just for argument's sake here, Colette, so you'll indulge me if you would. Two different basic kind of cultures at play here. You've got legacy media, which have been seen for many years as too slow to adapt and therefore have paid the price therefore. Digital media, seen as too focused on getting clicks, not really serious about doing serious journalism. How significantly do you think these cultures are affecting the long-term viability of the different outlets that are out there?
That is very simplified, but still very relevant. I think that the clickbait is a criticism that could also be made to the legacy media as well. I don't think that's specific to digital because they are in that digital environment, and that's an easy way to get audience attention and advertising revenue. But what they want to focus on, what they try to focus on, and not just the legacy media, I don't tend to oppose them. I understand that there's a conflict there between two groups, but in terms of practices, I see that both digital emerging media and legacy media are trying to do the type of investigative in-depth work, which gives you long-term credibility, which makes people want to pay for content or even donate to finance content, because nonprofit is one model, which is, in my mind, not the major, sign for the future, but it's one option in terms of revenue.
Anita, what's your take on the way I've just laid it out there?
Well, I agree with Colette in the fact that, given the fact that a lot of establishment media companies are trying to compete with digital media outlets, they're investing more. They're also there's an over-reliance on the ad model, which basically is driven by clickbait. So it's a scourge that affects both digital media companies and establishment media, though, there's definitely, if you're talking about culture, there are definitely clear distinctions and pros and cons with both. I myself I started off in legacy media, establishment media in Canada, and then I eventually made my way to more digital media startups, one of which was venture capital backed in the US, so.
Where do you think the future is brightest?
Well, at the Discourse, at digital media outlets that merge the innovation of new with the rigor of old. And so what I witnessed a lot, I had such an amazing education at a lot of the establishment companies that I worked at, including the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star, but there was a severe lack of innovation due to a lot of lack of resources. There was a hierarchical culture that was more prescriptive. And so given that management and establishment media companies tend to be homogenous, tend to be white, cis, straight males, that's a systemic issue. And that's not inherently problematic, except that if you're prescribing stories, they tend to come from a one very myopic view, whether that's even if it's not malicious or intentional in any way. So that's an issue. But in digital media outlets, there tends to be a flatter hierarchy. It tends to be more nimble. There's more risk-taking when it comes to producing journalistic content. But what I found when I was at digital media startups, especially when I first joined a place called Mashable in 2012, there was just less of an established kind of fewer established best practices.
Well, that is kind of the trick of what you're up to, Andrew, right? You are heading up a legacy media, which is trying very hard to make the transition to being something more digital and more nimble. How's it going?
Well, we think it's going well. I mean, it's a relative statement. You know, it's sort of a duality in our world, in our industry. You have a legacy business that's contracting. It's going through this systemic shift, almost like a tidal force. You know, there's less people wanting print subscriptions or print advertising, and so that's in contraction. And then you're trying to engineer growth in the digital world, and that's a very difficult thing to do. You kind of have two choices or two paths that have emerged globally. One is you try to build a digital advertising business, in which case you're competing against Google and Facebook, which is not for the faint of heart, or you try to build a digital subscription business, and we're seeing some evidence of that getting some traction. Tends to be restricted to what I would call more of the global iconic players, at least at scale. And so, you know, we're pursuing aspects of both, but we're very proud of the fact that we've engineered 8 quarters in a row of double-digit digital advertising growth, and we don't see a lot of companies globally that have managed to achieve that. One of the things I've noticed coming into the space is that there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of buzzwords, there's a lot of sort of verbosity around what people should do or how they should do things and what the future might hold. But ultimately what it comes down to is, how do you make something grow? You have a legacy business that's contracting, and that's happening for everyone around the world. And so what are you going to do to fill up that revenue balloon? And you've got to make something grow. And we've managed to do that. So we're quite proud and pleased with that.
I don't mean to be overly negative in this, and I'm delighted that your digital revenues are rising, but are they compensating for the fact that your print advertising is continuing to decline?
No, and we're very, I mean, listen, we're a public company. That's very much out there. You know, you can't necessarily solve for everything at once. You have a very large legacy business that on a global basis represented, I'm not sure billions, certainly hundreds of billions of dollars around the world. That revenue has in effect shifted to 2 platforms over the past decade. And you know, we're not trying to solve that level of revenue declination immediately. Step one is make something grow. Make something grow consistently, and ideally make something grow at scale, and then give yourself a path and a platform to take that to the next level over the coming quarters and years. So you're right, it hasn't solved for the declination we're seeing in the legacy business, but we are building a sizable digital advertising revenue business. It's north of 100 million for us. And if we can continue on this path of growth, we get to a point where we can start to see first stability and then perhaps growth at some point in the future.
Jesse, how do you like his chances?
Well, I won't look into a crystal ball. I'll look at what the facts are. The facts are that Postmedia, the biggest newspaper chain in Canada, did have digital growth of, I think, $11 million last year. And it lost, I think, $85 million between circulation and print advertising. And I need to push back at this idea that what Postmedia is doing is trying to genuinely make this transition. According to Conrad Black, the founder of the National Post, the management of Postmedia is complicit with the bondholders who are bleeding the company dry to pay off their bondholders, which is a New Jersey-based vulture fund called Chatham Asset Management. We can look at what Postmedia is doing, and it's still it's under investigation by the Competition Bureau, which raided Postmedia's offices when it traded newspapers with Toronto Star and killed many local newspapers. Why is this? I mean, this is of interest to me because I cover this field, so I have to be tough with people in your position. But we are now entering a place where the biggest news source of revenue for Postmedia is likely to be taxpayer dollars. And you know, when we talk about the press, we always say the independent press, the independent press. Paul Godfrey, who used to have the CEO job, has basically said, we can't be independent anymore. We need to become dependent on government. So everybody who's watching this right now will soon be paying for the $1 million plus retention bonuses paid out of Postmedia and so on. Now, why is this relevant to what we're actually talking about here today? If the conceit here today is how are we going to report the news to communities, and I have to butt up against, I think that there's a chance that these digital startups could fill in the void, but they're not doing it yet. We have news deserts in Canada. People are not getting the information about their local legislatures. What is working? What is working is laid off journalists, and Postmedia has laid off a lot of them, laid off journalists in markets that no longer have newspapers because newspapers have died, are showing early signs of success, knocking on doors and saying, will you fund me to go cover town council? We can't do that in Canada if we still have some Postmedia papers limping along on the taxpayer dole and they're not actually reporting things. And I have to be very specific about this. When we talk about fake news and the scourge of clickbait and fake news, in the context of Postmedia's newspapers, if you read Postmedia's newspapers, you may be under the impression that Syrian refugees are slaughtering goats in the bathrooms of hotels that are subsidized by the government. You may have read that in a Sue-Ann Levy column in the Toronto Sun. You may believe that Gerald Butts has broken ranks with Justin Trudeau and has publicly excoriated him over the SNC Lavalin. That was reported in Postmedia papers across this country.
Also inaccurate, you're saying?
Also inaccurate. Picked up from social media. I think the first one about the goats was picked up by a TripAdvisor. Her source on that was a TripAdvisor review. This is being reported across the country as fact. People make mistakes. Some of these get corrected, some of them don't. But we also uncovered in our investigation of Postmedia a election planning document here in Ontario where I've never seen anything like this in my life, where the editorial operations of the Toronto Sun were leveraged as a campaigning a propaganda tool for the Doug Ford candidacy, where explicitly news reporters were tasked to help get Doug Ford in office. So we're going to standards we've never seen newspapers at before. Paul Godfrey said, our papers are bad, or they're suffering, but they're not yet unacceptable. I think at this point they're unacceptable.
Well, okay, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, Andrew.
Sure.
For the record, certainly the reporters who were part of Postmedia said they knew nothing about that memo that you just referred to.
Well, in fact, their union asked management of Postmedia, will you assert the independence of our reporters? And Postmedia management refused to assert that.
Okay, Andrew, you're on. Lots to unpack.
Lot to digest there. I'd say a couple things. One, your diatribe was long. I'd say you'd say it was fact-based. I would argue that many of the points you made were not based in fact, but I don't think it's necessarily productive to get into a sort of a back and forth. I would say
I'm a journalist. If you're going to call the facts into question, I think you need to say which ones.
Well, we only have 29 minutes, and unfortunately you mentioned so many points, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I would say a couple of things. One, I don't think it's productive to get into these aggressive back and forths in terms of, there's a lot of tired narratives around negative, evil executives, evil hedge funds. At the end of the day, it doesn't produce outcomes that give us opportunities to try to engineer growth and stability in this space. That's what we're focused on at Postmedia. I think one of the things that's quite interesting in our space is that one of the paths that we mentioned earlier was the opportunity to build a subscription-based model. And what we're seeing in the media is that people are essentially trying to create content and stories that align to the desires of the consumers of that news. And so you're seeing, in my view at least, a return to 19th century journalism. As the advertising revenue comes out of our sector, you have to build a subscription model. And in order to do that, you need to provide content that is desirable to the constituents that you're serving it up to. And I think that my colleague here likes to create narratives and very negative connotations around Postmedia. It's convenient for him. And I imagine that it helps accelerate his subscription-based business. But it isn't necessarily, or it isn't accurate, and it isn't what we're doing at Postmedia, which is driving innovation.
I'd like to respond to that.
Okay, go ahead,
maybe
please.
From someone who isn't trying to get any subscribers to anything, so maybe something a little bit halfway.
Sure.
There are issues of editorial independence beyond the case of Postmedia. There are issues of how can you make journalism sustainable and remain with a structure of governance that is not too heavy, as you mentioned, because if you're going to get people to pay for content, if you're going to get people to donate for content, you can't have that heavy management
they got to trust you.
Yeah. Well, millennials are open to donating for, that kind of Patreon model or funding directly, like your model. But they need to feel that the money they're giving is going directly to content. So that's, part of it. Subscription is also, people are also looking at these costs. And editorial independence and governance is going to be an issue for all news producers, the bigger and the smaller ones. So, I agree to a certain extent. I don't want to get into the fray here, but that, we're going towards a more opinion-based model, as you were saying, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of opinion out there already, and
I think
the online environment makes it very hard because of the information overload, because of the speed of everything coming at us. It's very confusing as a consumer to be in this environment, which you want to take refuge in your opinions and your values, and facts become a problem, instead of a solution.
Let me just follow up on that, and we'll get everybody in on this one then. 2019 Edelman Trust Barometer. Edelman is this public relations company. They do this thing. What's the gap between the informed public and the mass population? They say it's never been wider right now. The mass population apparently has 20% less trust in media than the quote-unquote informed public, the latter being defined as educated, higher income, and who regularly consume some kind of business or public policy news. 71% of Canadians worry about fake news. That's up 6% from last year. Trust is at 71% for traditional media. I guess that's us. I guess that's you. 62% for search engines. 49% for online-only media. So there is still a trust gap between legacy media and online media. What do you think this portends for journalism going forward?
Well, I think that's why, for the Discourse, we're really investing in a membership model. I want to make the distinction between membership and subscription for a moment. So subscription is a revenue agreement. It's really just a financial transaction between a publisher and user. You're paying to access content. There's no emotional connection. Whereas membership is about buying into a community of like-minded people. In our case, it's not about politically like-minded. It's about people who want to affect change, who want to create a more inclusive democracy, who want to see solutions to systemic problems.
Values-based, if you like.
Yeah, it's values-based. And because you're cutting out the middleman, you're cutting out advertisers, it creates this virtuous circle where you're creating content or journalism of value to these communities, and you're filling in gaps, and they're willing to pay for it. And it's basically going back to this old school approach to journalism, which is, listening and engaging and leading with that. And so that really closes gaps in trust, particularly in underserved communities that have experienced a lot of exploitation at the hands of established media. So that's our approach.
Do online services have a trust problem at the moment?
Some of them do. Some of them do. I think that if you are, we're talking about two very different approaches. One is where you want the most emotionally based content possible, where you're trying to get as many clicks as possible, and you're selling each view at fractions of a penny. So you need millions and millions. It's an almost opposite model when you need people to subscribe or become members, direct payment, okay? You're looking for a small audience that cares so passionately about what you're doing that they are willing to cough up money for you to do that. Now, there's this common wisdom that people aren't willing to pay for news. It's not true. Canadians are willing to pay for news. The problem is more Canadians are paying the New York Times for a digital subscription than they're paying any Canadian newspaper.
Is that right?
That is correct. I mean, none of them have the numbers exposed, but they've let little,
The subscription costs are quite low for the New York Times compared to Canadian news outlets.
I don't know that that's the factor. Yeah. I mean, they've disclosed some of their. Sure, it does, but I think that the New York Times is a trusted. We're in a phase now where the news organizations that have come out of the last cycle, where newsrooms are getting smaller and smaller, and where traditional newsrooms have been following the Huffington Posts and BuzzFeeds into clickbait, the ones who came out of it with their reputations intact, their credibility intact, and their newsrooms intact, can do what the New York Times has done, what the Washington Post has done, and now that everyone is following the news in a certain segment, we're not going for everybody anymore. The time of the penny press for everybody is done. For serious news is going to be paid for by like 10 to 15% of the population. So if you still have credibility, if you still have good journalists, you can say, you guys, without us, how will you even know what's going on? How do you know that the mayor isn't giving his brother a no-bid contract right now? That credibility is finally valuable. The problem is, if you're a news organization that has been shedding your reporters and eviscerating your newsrooms and laying off people, as Postmedia has, you're in a very vulnerable position. You're not in a good position to ask people to pay for a subscription.
Let's state the obvious here. For the longest time, many legacy media, when they put their stuff online, have been giving it away for free, and they're discovering that's no way to stay alive. And can I just read this quote here? This is Emily Bell, who's the director of the Tow Center at the Columbia Journalism School. She wrote the following: "The problem now is so clear that even the most advanced digital thinkers can see it. A digital free market for journalism doesn't work." Andrew, what do you think that means?
Well, I think we just keep iterating on the same topic. And again, there's a lot of narratives out there, and we keep repeating them over and over again. I'm not sure where you get your facts around the New York Times and their subscription model. Maybe the same place you got your previous facts.
Which you've yet to
the bottom line is you have subscription-based models that are getting traction. You're seeing it with companies like the New York Times. I think that's one of the best examples out there on an international stage. You're also seeing advocacy-based and membership-based and philanthropic-based models get traction, but at a very sort of niche level. And so you're seeing different sort of approaches to constructive models that might be able to be replicated on a large-scale basis. But at the end of the day, if you want to have large coverage, if you want to have meaningful salaries, benefits, support, infrastructure for this institution, you need large revenue streams. It's not terribly complicated. And I think that the more you pursue a model based on a subscription, which is not a negative thing, it's perfectly fine, you run into a situation where, almost like a Pavlovian loop, you're incentivized to create content to serve the desires of the people reading it.
Okay, tell me this then. Facebook and Google clearly are the behemoths out there that are hoovering up all the ad dollars that you'd love to get a piece of the action of.
Yes.
What would it take to level the playing field a little bit more so you've got a shot at some of that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the concept of leveling the playing field really comes down to your sort of political view. Someone on the left might say, subsidize media in order to give it a chance to reinvent itself. Someone on the right might say, make it a free market, remove all of the challenges that legacy media has against it, create a similar playing field that Google and Facebook have within the Canadian marketplace. Right now, we kind of have the worst, in my opinion at least, of both worlds. And so, it's not for me to determine what would be required, but I mean, from my perspective, I believe there is a chance for us to compete with the Googles and the Facebooks. And I think we're living in the era of disruption. These companies didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago, and they're going to have their own issues in terms of what happens, in terms of their foundational elements start to quake a little bit. And it's our intention to be here to capitalize as they start to go through their own
Steve,
shifts.
I mean, if the future of news depends on companies like Postmedia competing with Facebook and Google, we're done. I mean, this is dire here. We're really we've been having this conversation about the future of news for a long time now. It's very practical and real right now. I fear for TVO with Doug Ford in office. It's in the crosshairs. So we're looking at any possible solution. Should the public fund it? Should it be public broadcasting? Should it be subscriber-based? Should it be member-based? We don't know. Anyone who pretends to know where news is going to get funded from in the future, I think, is speculating or lying.
It's going to resolve itself somewhere along the way, though, won't it?
I think that people wake up every day wanting to know what's going on. I think we have a service that people value and need, and I think that we need to cut out the middlemen, be they advertisers or governments or whatnot, and get to the news consumer and say, we have something you need, we perform a service that is vital. Who is willing to pay for this? That's the only question. So the only thing we do know is that ads are not where it's at, and that's competition with Facebook and Google. I don't want to be in competition with Facebook and Google.
Advertising is still a major source of revenue, and there are some major advertising. In Quebec, Desjardins,
I agree with you.
the financial cooperative, decided to invest more in local media because although they're still, of course, spending on Google and Facebook, but because they realize this is an important service, and also it might be a good business move as well. And media companies like La Presse, who has an entirely free model, I'm not sure that is working very well, but they have devised.
It may only work in Quebec and not anywhere else, also.
And to
how captive that
to a
market
limited
is.
extent, but I mean, there is a potential for growth in terms of advertising revenue. I don't think it should be discarded completely. I'd just like to talk about trust for a minute. Those trust numbers you talked about, the Edelman numbers. We do the digital news report with the Reuters Institute, which does a little more in depth on trust and specifically on media. And there's a lot of contradiction. If you look at, people are worried about fake news. They're distrustful of the media in general. But if you look at the traditional media and even traditional broadcasting brands, the trust is very high.
Still relatively trustworthy.
So I think that's part of going back to kind of these gold standards.
Forgive me, I'm down to my last 30 seconds here. The time just flies right by. Can I put it to you? There's a not-for-profit model that's out there as well. A lot of the, for example, newspapers that up till now have been trying to make it as profitable entities may not. And the notion of transforming them into not-for-profit vehicles to keep them alive, is that something you can see?
Well, we firmly believe that people are willing to pay for news content. So that's not a model that we're pursuing. And I want to echo some of my fellow panelists that millennials are actually very more likely to pay for news. A large portion of the audience pay news products. We're driven by people under the age of 35 since Trump's election. So I want to emphasize that. I also wanted to respond something to what Jesse said about the fact that local news outlets are not yet filling in gaps in coverage, but I want to emphasize that Discourse just launched something called Canadian Journalism Innovators, which essentially is trying to address a lack of innovation, money, and diversity in media. And we convened 9 digital media outlets that were audience pay focused in November, and we made the announcement of the launch in January. And since then, 70 outlets have approached us. So there's definitely a demand for local news. There's a lot of people who want to challenge the status quo best practices in Canadian media right now. And yeah, it's just there's a growing, robust digital media ecosystem, but it can definitely coexist with establishment media, is how we feel.
Can I do 2 things? Number 1, thank you all for participating in this discussion. And number 2, wish you all well, and I hope you make millions of bucks, all of you, doing the different things that you're doing in our media ecosphere right now. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.